June 6th, 1944 is often remembered as strategy and triumph, maps, arrows, and speeches. But on the beaches of Normandy it was chaos, terror, and obliteration. Men drowned under the weight of their own gear. Units vanished in seconds. Survival depended on luck more than courage. Tonight we strip away the mythology and focus on the few combat films that dared to show D-Day as it truly was. Not glorious, not clean, but brutally human. Number 10. A Bridge Too Far. A Bridge Too Far is not a D-Day film in the traditional sense. It does not place its camera on Omaha or Utah or Juno. Instead, it earns its place here by doing something equally important. It shows the cost of believing that D-Day was the end of suffering rather than the beginning of something far worse. Released in 1977, the film examines Operation Market Garden, the disastrous Allied gamble that followed Normandy. What makes it relevant is how mercilessly it dismantles the illusion of momentum. After D-Day, there was a belief that German resistance had cracked, that the worst was over. A Bridge Too Far shows how that belief translated into rushed planning, exhausted troops, and catastrophic loss. The brutality here is not in beach landings, but in consequences. Soldiers who survived Normandy are dropped again behind enemy lines with insufficient support. Gliders crash, radios fail, timetables collapse. Men fight street by street, knowing reinforcements are not coming. The violence is sudden, chaotic, and often pointless. Characters do not die heroically. And they bleed out in hallways or are wiped out holding bridges that will never be held. What connects this film to D-Day is its honesty about continuity. D-Day did not end trauma. It multiplied it. The men in A Bridge Too Far carry invisible scars from earlier battles. Fatigue clouds judgment. Confidence becomes arrogance. The film quietly suggests that Normandy created a myth of inevitability that killed thousands more. Director Richard Attenborough resists triumphalism. Even when moments succeed, they feel fragile, temporary. Victory is partial and soaked in regret. The final scenes do not celebrate lessons learned. They mourn lessons ignored. As a companion piece to D-Day cinema, A Bridge Too Far is essential. It forces the viewer to confront a truth that beach landing films often avoid. Surviving D-Day did not mean surviving the war. It meant being sent deeper into it. Number 9. They Were Expendable. They Were Expendable was released in 1945 while the war was still fresh. That timing matters. This is not a film shaped by nostalgia or retrospective hero worship. It was made while grief was raw and the meaning of sacrifice still unresolved. The film follows American PT boat crews in the Pacific rather than Normandy itself, but its relevance to D-Day lies in its philosophy. This is one of the earliest war films to openly acknowledge that expendability was not an accident. It was policy. Unlike later combat films that frame sacrifice as noble destiny, They Were Expendable frames it as necessity without comfort. Missions are assigned knowing men will not return. Boats are sent out knowing they cannot win. Orders are followed not because they make sense, but because there is no alternative. This mindset defined D-Day. Infantry units were dropped onto beaches knowing casualty estimates were staggering. Some units were statistically doomed. They Were Expendable articulates that reality without speeches or dramatics. Men accept their role quietly. They joke. They argue. They go anyway. Director John Ford, who himself served during the war, avoids spectacle. Combat is brief, confusing, and unresolved. Losses are not punctuated by swelling music. Characters simply disappear from the story. The absence is the point. What makes the film haunting is its emotional restraint. No one calls the system cruel out loud. No one delivers a moral verdict. The film trusts the audience to feel the weight of what is happening. That restraint mirrors how D-Day was experienced by many who survived it. Not as a single moment of horror, but as the realization that survival often came down to whether your name was on the wrong list. They Were Expendable does not recreate Normandy visually. It recreates Normandy psychologically, the understanding that someone had already decided who could be lost. Number 8. The Big Red One. The Big Red One is not loud. It does not chase shock. It does not beg the audience to be impressed. And that is exactly why it may be the most honest D-Day adjacent film ever made. Director Samuel Fuller was there. He landed in Normandy with the 1st Infantry Division. He knew what the beach smelled like. He knew how men moved when fear hollowed them out, and he refused to dress that knowledge up. Released in 1980, the film follows a small infantry unit from North Africa through Europe, including Normandy. When D-Day arrives, it is not framed as a cinematic event. It simply happens. Men advance because they are told to. Bullets come from everywhere and nowhere. Death is sudden, unannounced, and rarely acknowledged. What makes the D-Day sequence so unsettling is how little time the film spends explaining anything. There are no speeches, no swelling score, no strategic overview. Soldiers hit the beach already exhausted, already confused, already resigned to the possibility that this is where it ends. Some do not even know where they are. That confusion mirrors survivor testimony far more closely than traditional war epics. Fuller focuses on routine brutality, clearing bunkers, stepping over bodies, continuing forward because stopping would mean dying. When men fall, the unit barely reacts. There is no time for grief. That emotional numbness is the real horror. D-Day was not experienced as a dramatic crescendo. It was experienced as an overwhelming flood of tasks performed under terror. The film's most disturbing moments are quiet. A child killed accidentally. A soldier realizing he has become capable of killing without emotion. These moments underline what Normandy did to the men who lived through it. It did not just test courage, it rewired humanity. The Big Red One treats D-Day not as a singular nightmare, but as the beginning of a long erosion. Surviving the beach only meant enduring everything that followed. Fuller's camera never lets the audience forget that. Number 7. Overlord. Overlord may be the least famous film on this list and one of the most devastating. Released in 1975, it abandons almost every convention of the war genre. There are no heroic arcs, no ensemble of colorful characters, no emotional release. Instead, the film traps the viewer inside inevitability. The story follows a single British soldier from training through the Normandy invasion. What makes Overlord unique is its use of real wartime footage seamlessly blended with stage scenes. The effect is chilling. Fiction and history bleed into each other until the distinction no longer matters. This is not a story about a man. It is a story about a process. Training scenes are mechanical, repetitive, dehumanizing. Men are drilled not to think, but to obey. As the invasion approaches, excitement never appears. Only tension and dread. When D-Day finally arrives, it is not explosive. It is heavy. Soldiers move like ghosts already halfway gone. The landing itself is fragmented. We do not see grand battle choreography. We see faces staring forward, boots hitting water, bodies falling without context. The film refuses to provide emotional cues. There is no music to tell you how to feel. The silence becomes oppressive. What Overlord captures better than almost any other film is the psychological preparation for disposability. These men are not sold glory. They are processed. Number 6. Storming Juno. Storming Juno exists because Canadian experience of D-Day is too often reduced to a footnote. This film refuses that erasure. It places Canadian infantry directly into the killing ground of Juno Beach and shows that survival, there was no cleaner, no kinder, and no less terrifying than Omaha. Released in 2010, the film reconstructs the landing with a grim procedural tone. There is no attempt to mythologize. The beach is narrow, exposed, and lethal. Landing craft open and men are immediately cut down. Equipment drags soldiers under the surf. Bodies pile up against obstacles. Orders are shouted but rarely heard. What distinguishes Storming Juno is its emphasis on momentum as a weapon. The Canadians succeed not because the beach is easier, but because stopping means death. The film shows men pushing forward while stepping over their own casualties because hesitation is fatal. That detail aligns closely with veteran testimony. D-Day was not about bravery in the abstract. It was about movement under fire. The film also captures the disintegration of unit cohesion. Leaders fall early. Radios fail. Small groups advance without knowing who is left alive. Victory emerges not from planning, but from relentless pressure applied by survivors who have no choice but to keep going. There is no grand catharsis at the end of the landing. The beach is taken, but at an immense cost. Number 5. Band of Brothers famously avoids depicting the beach landings directly. That decision is often misunderstood. In reality, it may be the most honest creative choice the series makes. The story follows Easy Company paratroopers drop behind enemy lines in the early hours of D-Day. They do not see the beaches, they hear them. Distant gunfire, explosions on the horizon. The invasion is felt rather than witnessed. That perspective reflects how many soldiers experience D-Day. Fragmented, disoriented, uncertain. The brutality arrives in the aftermath. Scattered landings leave men isolated. Friends are missing. Equipment is lost. Missions must proceed anyway. The series captures the psychological cost of D-Day as something that unfolds over days, not minutes. What makes Band of Brothers essential is its attention to trauma. Characters change after D-Day. Fear becomes constant. Death becomes routine. Leadership hardens. Compassion narrows. The men who survive the drop are not celebrated. They are immediately tasked with killing more efficiently. The series repeatedly undercuts hero narratives. Successes feel accidental. Mistakes are lethal. Orders are followed even when they make no sense on the ground. That dissonance between command and reality mirrors the larger D-Day experience. The landing was only the first wound. Number 4. The Longest Day. The Longest Day occupies a complicated place in D-Day cinema. It is often remembered as clean, dignified, and old-fashioned. But that reputation hides something important. In this film was made while the men who stormed the beaches were still alive, still working, still carrying those memories quietly. Its restraint is not cowardice. It is proximity. Released in 1962, the film was built from first-hand accounts on both sides of the invasion. Many of its advisors had been there. That reality shapes every creative decision. Violence is present but not stylized. Death happens quickly and without flourish. The camera often pulls back not to soften the impact but to show scale. The overwhelming size of the operation becomes its own form of horror. What The Longest Day captures better than later, more graphic films is confusion. Plans unravel. Units land in the wrong places. Paratroopers are scattered miles from their objectives. Communication collapses almost immediately. The invasion feels less like a coordinated masterpiece and more like controlled chaos, barely held together by momentum. The beach sequences, especially Omaha, are tense in a different way. There is little blood by modern standards, but there is relentless pressure. Men pinned behind obstacles unable to move. Engineers blown apart while clearing paths. Medics overwhelmed. The lack of graphic detail forces the viewer to focus on vulnerability. Bodies crouched low against steel and sand, hoping the next second is survivable. The film also refuses to personalize heroism too heavily. Characters appear briefly, then vanish. This reflects reality. Many men never became stories. They became statistics. The film's ensemble structure mirrors that anonymity. Number 3. D-Day, the 6th of June. D-Day, the 6th of June is often dismissed as a romantic melodrama. That dismissal misses its quiet courage. Released in 1956, this film was made when the wounds of Normandy were still fresh enough to hurt and still close enough to silence. The film splits its time between a love story and the invasion itself. At first glance, that structure seems to soften the event. In reality, it deepens it. By grounding D-Day in personal stakes, the film reminds the audience that every man on the beach was someone before he was a soldier. When the landing begins, it is stark and emotionally raw. There is no triumphant framing. The invasion interrupts lives mid-sentence. Promises remain unfinished. Letters go unread. The violence is not stylized but sudden and terrifying. What this film captures that many later combat films do not is dread. Characters talk about D-Day before it happens. They fear it. They try not to. The looming invasion hangs over every scene like a sentence waiting to be carried out. When it arrives, it feels inevitable rather than shocking. The beach assault itself is brief but harrowing. Men fall immediately. Others freeze. Some push forward simply because there is nowhere else to go. The film does not linger on gore. It lingers on faces. Shock, confusion, realization. By cutting between personal memory and battlefield chaos, the film makes a devastating point. Number 2. Ike Countdown to D-Day. Ike Countdown to D-Day does not begin with gunfire. It begins with doubt. That choice alone sets it apart from most war films and makes it essential to understanding how brutal D-Day truly was. Released in 2004, the film focuses on the final days before the invasion through the eyes of Dwight D. Eisenhower and the commanders around him. What it reveals is not confidence or certainty, but fear on an almost unbearable scale. Casualty estimates are discussed openly. Tens of thousands of young men are expected to die. No one pretends otherwise. This is where the brutality begins, long before the beaches. D-Day was not only violent because of what happened at Normandy, it was violent because of the knowledge carried by those who ordered it. The film shows Eisenhower wrestling with responsibility that cannot be shared. He knows that once the order is given, the suffering cannot be stopped. What makes the film so disturbing is its restraint. There are no combat sequences meant to thrill. Instead, there are conversations heavy with dread. Weather reports become life or death verdicts. A single decision made in a quiet room will determine how many bodies wash ashore. The film includes brief glimpses of soldiers waiting to board landing craft. They joke, they smoke, they write. The audience knows what is coming. That knowledge creates a tension more crushing than any explosion. The number 1, Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan remains the benchmark because it finally refused to lie. Released in 1998, the opening Omaha Beach sequence shattered decades of sanitized war cinema. For the first time, mainstream audiences were confronted with D-Day as survivors described it. Disorientation, terror, random death, no clear front line, no safe moment. The camera does not glide, it stumbles. The sound design overwhelms. Bullets tear through bodies without warning. Men drown under the weight of their own equipment. Medics scream for help they cannot give. Orders are meaningless in the noise. What makes the scene unbearable is its indifference. The beach does not care who you are. Courage offers no protection. Skill offers no guarantee. Men die mid-step, mid-thought, mid-breath. That randomness reflects historical reality more accurately than any choreographed battle ever could. Steven Spielberg consulted extensively with veterans. Many were unable to watch the sequence. Some left theaters shaking. Others said it was the first time cinema came close to what they remembered. That reaction matters. It confirms the film did not invent brutality. It uncovered it. Crucially, the film does not end brutality with the beach. It shows how that opening trauma shapes everything that follows. Characters are numb, hardened, haunted. The violence of Normandy echoes through every decision. Saving Private Ryan does not glorify D-Day. It explains why it must never be simplified. It forces the audience to confront the price paid by men who were mostly young, mostly terrified, and mostly forgotten. This is why it stands at number 1. Not because it is graphic, but because it is honest. D-Day is often remembered as a turning point. These films remind us it was also a breaking point. For bodies, for minds, for futures never lived. If history is to mean anything, it must be remembered as it was experienced. Not as triumph, but as survival carved out of terror.